BioShock Infinite has finally released, and it's been affecting lives ever since. I've beaten the game many times, and I can safely say that the game is one of the best games, if not experiences, I have ever experienced. One of the reasons I like the game so much is the ending. Not only does the ending wrap up everything very nicely, but it is also vague enough to let people still question what they saw. In the end, many different people believe many different things, and this video is designed to showcase what I believe. To accomplish this, I divided my analysis into two parts. This first part will discuss basic questions that are easily answered. I will simply present the ending in chronological order and give you my related thoughts. The second part will deal with the more complex questions and the more complex answers. By the end of my analysis, I hope to make the ending a little more understandable and a lot more fun to think about. Before I get started, I want to advise that anyone that hasn't finished BioShock Infinite should stop watching this video right now. I am going to be taking everything into account. I will not be explaining that the Lutece twins built a machine that allowed them to travel through time and space. I will not be talking about how Comstock ordered Jeremiah Fink to kill the Lutece twins, and I'll definitely not be talking about how the Lutece twins are stuck traveling through time and space due to a malfunction in their machine caused by Jeremiah Fink. Also, never mind the new shirt. Don't worry about it. Anyway, I'm going to start this analysis where the game left off. Rapture.
Comstock is dead and the siphon is destroyed, so Elizabeth decides to transport Booker, Songbird, and herself to Rapture. The reason for this decision has yet to be revealed. After the sad demise of Songbird, Elizabeth reveals that Rapture is a doorway, one of many. Elizabeth then guides Booker to a bathysphere, which then transports them to a lighthouse. Elizabeth then tells Booker that she sees more doorways. Of course, nothing has been made clear yet. Everything that Booker has seen has only introduced more questions and answered none. However, the answer to those questions presented are not simple. In fact, the answers are arguably more complex than the questions. This is evident when Elizabeth finds out that the first door which she desires to open is locked. The problem is instantly solved by the key that is needed appearing in Elizabeth's hand. When the siphon that hindered Elizabeth's powers was destroyed, Elizabeth was able to use her powers to their full potential. Though Booker doesn't understand what those powers are yet, the key represents Elizabeth's realization that she can now control the powers she's had all along. With that knowledge, she opens the first door. Upon stepping through the first doorway, the story obviously takes a turn towards insanity. Booker is thrust into an ocean filled with lighthouses. Although she doesn't make it extremely clear, Elizabeth starts to explain the concept of constants and variables. With all due respect to Elizabeth, I will now try to explain that concept better than she did. There are a million different worlds. All of them are similar, but all of them are different. This is a concept I've spent my life thinking about because it's always been so interesting. I can guarantee that you have thought about it as well. Have you ever thought the question, what if? What if Booker chose tails instead of heads? What if Booker never tried to force Elizabeth to go to New York? Every question asked is answered by the concept of constants and variables. Every time someone makes a decision, two or more realities are created. For example, flipping a coin can lead to an outcome with heads and an outcome with tails. What BioShock Infinite and I are trying to tell you is that both of those outcomes happen. Two realities will form where one reality will have a heads outcome and the other will have tails. In addition, one coin flip is only one variable between realities. Every choice you make is another variable that creates two or more realities. Therefore, millions of worlds are created by millions of variables. Each lighthouse represents another world that was formed due to at least one variable that differentiated that world from another. However, that just covers the concept of variables and not constants. Constants are things that will always happen. For example, if my coin had heads on both sides, it would always land on heads. Therefore, there will always be one outcome in one reality. There's always a lighthouse, there's always a man, there's always a city. With this line, Elizabeth explains that BioShock itself is always a constant. In every reality created, there will always be some city led by some man that tries to be different from the rest. Whether that city is in the clouds or underwater, that city will always exist. Since there are millions of worlds, there's basically an infinite amount of Bioshocks. Just in case you haven't gotten it yet, that's where the name BioShock Infinite comes from. Furthermore, Elizabeth explains that Booker, Songbird, and she are constants. We don't know what role they play in other realities that were not presented yet, but they exist in all realities. With that concept hopefully explained, it's time to walk through the threshold of another door. Upon stepping through the second doorway, Booker is greeted with an even more insane sight, another Booker and Elizabeth. With each choice made in BioShock Infinite, another Booker and Elizabeth were created in another reality. In that reality, Booker obviously made a choice that the player did not. A good example would be the second reality Elizabeth transported Booker and herself into. In that reality, Booker was a martyr. Booker chose to ally himself with Slate and died doing it. However, there are other realities where the variables didn't change the outcome of events. There are other realities where Booker continued to live and ended up exactly where this Booker has. The Booker and Elizabeth coming from the other lighthouse represent that concept. We swim in different oceans, but land on the same shore. However, that's not where the story ends. Elizabeth knows what has to be done, even though Booker's still trying to piece the puzzle together. To help Booker see what she sees, Elizabeth tells Booker that they need to go back to where it started. If you haven't figured it out already, each doorway is a tear made by Elizabeth. These tears that Elizabeth is able to create are ways of manipulating all realities. She has the ability to jump between realities, to jump through time and space, and even merge the elements of two realities. She's obviously had these powers all along, but she now has the ability to control them to their full extent. With her powers in check, she lets Booker step through the next doorway. Elizabeth transports Booker to an event that happened 20 years ago, when Booker decided to refuse baptism. Booker wanted to cleanse his life of all sins, but upon getting to the baptism, he knew that no amount of water could change the things that he did. Elizabeth knew that, Booker knew that, and now the player does too. However, a new twist is presented. Comstock is still alive. Though Booker doesn't understand it yet, the truth is evident. For every reality where Booker failed, Comstock continues to live in that reality. Once again, a good example of this would be the reality where Booker died a martyr by allying himself with Slate. This Booker may have killed that Comstock in that reality, but there are a million other similar realities that Booker didn't travel to. In those realities, Booker stayed a martyr and nothing more. Therefore, Comstock is still alive and Elizabeth is determined to stop him. Elizabeth uses another door to transport Booker to a moment he doesn't recall, but it's a moment that happened. Almost 20 years before the events of BioShock Infinite, Comstock was looking for an heir to his throne. Since he became sterile, he decided to use Rosalind Lutez's machine that allowed travel between realities to travel to Booker's reality. He planned to wipe away the debts Booker gained from a life of drinking and gambling in exchange for his child. He decided to use Robert Lutez as a middleman, and that's where the scene being shown picks up. Robert Lutez is requesting Anna DeWitt, Booker's child, in order for Comstock to wipe away the debt. However, Booker still doesn't understand what's going on. In fact, upon seeing Anna, Booker denies that she ever existed and states that he would never give Robert the baby. However, Elizabeth states that he's not leaving the room until he does. Booker is then forced to hand Anna over to Robert, who then wipes away Booker's debt and walks away. Instantly regretting his decision, Booker quickly opens the door and finds himself in a familiar boat with Elizabeth sitting opposite of him. Booker continues to deny that he ever gave Anna to Robert, but his nose starts to bleed. Bleeding noses in this game are crucial to the story. A nosebleed represents two memories conflicting within the same mind. For yet another example, when Booker and Elizabeth traveled to the reality where Booker was a martyr, he didn't know what role he played in that reality at first. However, upon seeing a poster idolizing him, he started to remember that he allied himself with Slate and helped lead Fitzroy's revolution. As soon as he started to remember what his other self accomplished, his nose started to bleed. The same thing is happening in this scene. Booker is starting to remember what his past self did, and now it's being proven by his nose bleeding. However, Booker still sticks to his gun and states that he never gave Anna to Robert. Booker then climbs a ladder that leads to the next doorway. On the walk there, Elizabeth starts to explain how Comstock is still alive, so that Booker finally starts to understand what Elizabeth already knows. With Comstock's existence evident to Booker, Elizabeth now states that the only way to kill Comstock is by making sure he never lived in the first place. With those thoughts in mind, Booker opens the next door. Upon stepping through the threshold of the doorway, Booker is transported back to the night he gave Anna to Robert. This time, Booker is in an alleyway where Robert and Comstock are preparing to take Anna back into Comstock's reality. Booker, trying to redeem himself for giving Anna to Robert in the first place, calls the deal off by running at Comstock and trying to take Anna by force. Comstock obviously refuses to let this happen, so he tells Rosalind to turn the machine off while he pulls Anna through the tear. The tear between realities starts to close, and this is when the game punches your heart with one of the most intense moments in the game. As Comstock starts to win the tug-of-war for Anna, Anna reaches out for Booker in a very familiar manner. Time slows down, the tear closes, and Anna's pinky finger becomes severed since it was still in Booker's reality when the tear closed. That's the moment when Booker and the player realize that Anna and Elizabeth are the same person. With two parts of her being in two different realities, Elizabeth gained the ability to manipulate realities as she sees fit. As a voxophone by Rosalind Lutez states,
"A small part of her remains from where she came. It would seem the universe does not like its peas mixed with its porridge."
As all becomes clear, the screen fades to white. As the screen fades back in, Booker finds himself in his apartment. Obviously, Booker is extremely sorry for the events that he just relived. Booker walks towards Anna's room because he's still clinging onto the desperate hope that what he just saw never happened. As he reaches to open the door, Elizabeth reminds him that Anna's gone. Booker, still with hope, puts his right hand in front of the door. When his hand comes into frame, the AD mark is put on display to finally nail the point home to Booker. Elizabeth explains that he lived with regret for almost 20 years after the incident. During those years, he marked his right hand with his lost daughter's initials. However, all hope was not lost. Elizabeth goes on to explain what happened just before the events of BioShock Infinite took place. With the Luteces scattered through time and space, they came back to Booker's reality to offer him a chance at redemption. They offered him a chance to take Anna, now known as Elizabeth, back into his reality. Obviously, Booker took that offer and walked through the tear that the Luteces created. As soon as Booker was in Comstock's reality, his mind had to adjust. To help Booker cope with the trauma that jumping into a new reality for the first time causes, Booker's mind deleted a majority of his memories and created new ones. Booker built a story where he was simply going to Columbia to rescue Elizabeth to wipe away the debt that has already been wiped away. Most nosebleeds that Booker experienced throughout the game represented his mind finally remembering what it already erased. With all his lost memories intact, Booker realizes that he has a new goal to accomplish. He is no longer a man rescuing Elizabeth. He is now a father trying to undo any harm done to Anna DeWitt. Booker awakes back on the boat going to the lighthouse. This is where it all started. He now knows what he forgot, and he now knows what must be done. He knows that the only way to kill Comstock is by killing him before he was ever born. This is the realization Elizabeth was trying to get Booker to realize, so they both head to the lighthouse where the last door waits to be opened. They get to the door and Booker gets ready to open it, but Elizabeth stops him. Before he opens the door, she asks him, "Are you sure this is what you want?" Since I'm assuming that you have already finished the game, you should know just how heartbreaking that question is. She knows what lies beyond the door. She knows what needs to be done. However, she still wants to give Booker the option to back away. She cares for him, and what lies beyond this last door could possibly be too much for her to handle. With that question posed, Booker says he must open the door. It's the only way for him to undo what he's done to her. Booker then opens the door. Booker finds himself back at what seems to be the baptism that he refused 20 years ago. He turns around to see many Elizabeths entering from the sides of the screen. Booker gets extremely confused, but she makes everything clear. Booker is actually Comstock. The baptism itself is a variable. In one reality, Booker refused the baptism and went on to be who he is. However, he took the baptism in the other reality. In that reality, he was born again as Comstock. He went on to become a very religious person, took Columbia to the sky, and took Booker's child for himself. To stop all Comstocks from being born, Booker must die before the baptism ever happens. With this information finally revealed, 3 of the Elizabeths drown Booker. Thus, Comstock ceases to exist. With Comstock's existence cancelled, all the Elizabeths start to slowly disappear. After all, if there is no Comstock timeline, there is no Elizabeth. After a few seconds, only one Elizabeth is left on screen. The screen cuts to black.
I'd recommend taking the ending of BioShock Infinite at face value if you are satisfied with how it ended. I wanted to look into it more. After many sleepless nights, I've come up with my own answers for the questions that weren't explicitly answered. In fact, I've come up with so much stuff that, like I stated at the beginning, I had to split my analysis into 2 parts. You've seen part 1, but part 2 will discuss things that you probably haven't questioned. For example, I'll be talking about the Luteces in more detail, I'll have an explanation for that vague post-credit scene, and I'll give you some details on Elizabeth that a lot of people tend to miss. Now, before I tell you how to get into part 2, I need to change my shirt again. To find the answers, click this link. Right here. It will take you to part 2 of my analysis, if it is completed. If it's not completed, then this is going to get really awkward really fast. Just click it anyway. You never know what'll happen. It could take you somewhere cool. Somewhere really cool. Really cool. Just do it. Okay, you're not clicking the link.